And I really want to turn to the audience now. I'm sure you have questions, and if you have any questions that you don't want to speak yourself, please pass them on to my colleagues and I can ask. We've collected some questions from some of the focus groups and some of the consultations we've done, which I will sort of take one from the floor and then read one question that we have, and they're directed at various members of the panel and the expert panel. Do I have any questions right now? Oh, yourself, sir.
First of all, thank you all very much for inviting me here. It's a beautiful audience. My name is Paul Phoenix, and I live in Lewisham. I've just finished a summer project with some youngsters, and mainly black youngsters, and I've been teaching them numeracy and art. And what struck me really was I was appalled by the lack of mathematical ability in a lot of these youngsters, and that goes all across the board. Now, I'm also a member of the IFG in Lewisham. I was formerly a member of the IFG in Scotland Yard. Now, we are always talking about knife, gun crime. I spent 9 years in the army. 2 years of that was an active service. I've never ever used a weapon to settle any argument. So it's not a case of weapons are there, so the youth would use them. It's a mindset. Now, I noticed in a lot of these seminars and talks, there's hardly any youngsters.
Yes.
You know, and I think we are talking about the youth, meaning why don't we invite them? You know, why don't we invite them and their parents? And it's heartbreaking because I know there's a solution. We all know what the solution is. How do we get it in the schools? How do we get it to the youth? I think we have to look at the council, because the council are the people who've got the most resources to put towards these issues. But I would like to see more youth and more parents at these seminars. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I talked a little bit earlier about some of the work that we are doing in schools, particularly in relation to your question around trying to raise awareness and to tackle young people's understanding and to promote mutual respect and that important principle for the basis of human relationships. In terms of engaging young people in general in kind of civic matters, I think this is a refrain that I hear a lot in public meetings. I don't think this forum is necessarily the best one to engage young people, but you're absolutely right about the role that we all play. And as much as I think that that's absolutely right, and we're already doing some stuff in schools, and there's a role for the council, I think this is a role for all of us. The work that I've been talking about in terms of tackling the sort of the more kind of crime end of it through the Safer Croydon board, that is made up of a partnership of police and health and council and community, and I think that we all have the potential to perpetrate this. Obviously, trying to prevent it from happening leads us to the importance of engaging young people and making sure that those relationships and those attitudes are as progressive as possible. But actually, there is it's multi-layered, as people have already said. So absolutely appreciate what you're saying. We are doing some stuff in schools. We could always be doing more. I would say that our influence on the school system is limited because of the change in the nature of how schools are run, and the idea that councils have the most resources in the public sphere is not my experience of local government right now, but I shall leave it there.
Adding on to what Councillor Ali has said, there are a number of workshops run across the borough in schools. We've got a anti-prejudice workshop that's been run in the east of the borough in the schools in New Addington, Shrublands and Monks Hill, because again this is through reporting and being able to focus our work around specific areas of hate crime or hate incidents. We've been able to identify that those schools needed a particular type of workshop. So we commissioned the Anne Frank Trust, who went up there and worked with a number of the schools. Also, over last year, during National Hate Crime Awareness Week, we worked again with a number of young people organisations that work around the hate crime or hate incident space. For instance, the Bridge Project, which is a young LGBT group, we're working with them this year in holding events in the coming next month, and also identifying what work we can do in the school to tackle hate incidents that happen in the school that you've mentioned before. So rather than we come up with a plan, we're asking young people who are affected by this to come up with action and work with them to identify how we can tackle this in the education system.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sharon. So if I turn to some of the questions I've got written down here, Iman and Rahman, I've got a question here saying, what will happen to hate crime figures post-Brexit? Can you give us some insights?
Well, after Brexit, we heard some of the comments that hate crime in general, whether it was anti-Muslim or anti-Semitic or homophobic or disability, it increased. So all strands of hate crimes increased after Brexit, and one of the language, like Shakil mentioned, that if it comes from the position of power, comments from powerful people like politicians, that create a huge impact. One of the spikes that we observed in a recent finding in 2018 was, unfortunately, some of the comments of the present Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, when he said to Muslim women with the veiled letterboxes and bank robbers. So in August 2018, when these comments were made, there was a rise of 375% of anti-Muslim hate crime, where Muslim women with hijab and niqab were targeted. Especially 38 cases were reported following that raid, and women were called letterboxes, and the rhetoric was repeated, unfortunately. So same trend we expect, unfortunately, that once the this Brexit is after the Brexit, we may be expecting the similar trend. Some of the cases reported after the Brexit vote involved some of the non-Muslim people who were perceived as Muslims. There was a case of a Sikh doctor who was perceived as a Muslim, and his 90-year-old patient said, "Oh, you must be on a plane back to Pakistan by now." And the doctor said, I'm only trying to fix you, and you're sending me back to Pakistan, although I'm not from Pakistan even. So that's kind of ignorance, and we are expecting it's a very sad situation. Want to add?
It's a tricky answer to say. It's going to go on the rise. It's going to go on the. People are not going to report things. I mean, one thing we've seen following Brexit is that people became more aware of what racism is. Following the vote in 2016, because of what was happening, people were coming forward and reporting things. Because of the abuse that people were getting, people were standing up against it. So it might be that the discussions that will take place in the coming days might bring more awareness to this, and we see high levels of reporting, as we've seen following the Brexit vote, because this has been seen across the board from community organizations as well as police forces. So this is something that possibly we're looking at. I know there's more awareness taking place from organizations, local authorities, police forces on all levels, and there's food groups and there's different groups that are put in place in order to support communities at this time. I think it started in March and then went off and back again now. So there's a lot of activity in terms of awareness raising that's taking place that again might trigger that reporting to go higher. Reporting is still low. Everyone has been saying that. Despite the fact that we see a rise in hate crimes, in hate incidents on all levels, police levels, organizations level, it's because people are becoming more aware and coming forward. But that doesn't mean that on every single street in the UK and every single street in Croydon, there's a hate crime. I mean, the one thing that we need to look at as well and put it into perspective, yes, it's on the rise. Yes, there's more that's coming out. Whether it's because people are becoming more aware and coming forward to reporting, whether it is that genuinely people are becoming more emboldened to come and be racist, or whether really the global trend of hate, as we started with, is actually on the rise. So it's not just because the UK and people in the UK are really bad. because it is still a minority that is perpetuating that hate, and we need to bear this in mind when we talk about hatred and we talk about the racism that we're seeing. The other thing that I think we need to look at is really how do we address issues when we see that following Brexit or in the run-up to Brexit there are more reports coming. The last thing that we want is communities to be scared. The last thing that we want is to create that fear within communities. So one, messages of unity that we need to put out, but two, talking about those reports that are coming in real life and talking about them and addressing them without creating that fear again within communities. We've seen that following the Punish a Muslim letter last year in April. One letter has created fear across the country where we have people calling in tears that they don't want to leave home. And the last thing that we want is actually for us to disseminate information around any attacks that might take place following Brexit and escalating it without verifying that that attack took place. So I do call on each and every one of you and call each and every friend of yours to actually be super, super, super responsible in the run-up to Brexit on sharing anything that comes your way around attacks before verifying that information. We're sometimes too quick to share that information on social media, on WhatsApp, on Twitter, on Facebook, just because we know that friend of ours that said, oh my God, this has happened and this and this. And believe me, so many of these reports sometimes are either made up, either photoshopped, or never happened. Not to undermine that there are attacks that are taking place. There are. And the problem is when we do share these fake reports, they undermine the real attacks that are taking place, and we need to be super responsible to do that, specifically in the run-up to Brexit.
Just quickly come back to two things. The point Paul made about youngsters. I mean, in Croydon, we are working towards setting up a youth IAG as well now in order to address issues at the youngsters level, but that's work in progress. So we recognize the issues that you've raised. The second question is, I actually had a dedicated meeting with the police, and Craig would be here to answer this, to plan for post-Brexit. You know, what may happen in terms of potential flashpoints and conflicts and attacks, and so we, with the police, there is in fact the whole of London now, there are contingency plans in place that the police has been developing and practicing with tabletop exercises and trying to anticipate what may happen. Clearly it's uncertain. Clearly no one has a crystal ball that can give an accurate prediction of what might happen, but every scenario based on what happened post a referendum has been played out, and plans are in place in order for the police to respond and to be able to bring any escalation under control quickly. And if Craig was here, he would have been able to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Councillor Ali, did you say?
Thank you. I just wanted to really reinforce Iman's point about trends in conversation on social media, either videos and incidents that didn't really happen, or the only place that they're reported is social media and not to the police, not to the council. And I find this in relation to whether it's fly tipping or even incidents of hate crime, that often social media is a place that people go to report, but won't have sent that through the channel, so that the authority with the responsibility to respond is not aware. So I couldn't reinforce Iman's point enough. It's certainly something that I notice a great deal. Important to share information responsibly, and also to report it to those who can do something.
In fact, today I received a WhatsApp message from somebody I trust, saying that there is an amnesty, a silent amnesty for illegal immigrants before Brexit, and if we knew any illegal immigrants, to quickly go and fill up form whatever, and it was very detailed about each section of the form, and it came across as a very genuine sort of thing, and it was post-Windrush, and it pulled on all the sort of right issues. And so I rang a colleague at the Home Office and I said, is this genuine, before we share it out or speak to anybody that we might know. And absolutely it was not genuine. So I think this responsible sort of reporting as people within the community, if we receive things like this, it's also our responsibility to go and check with the authorities to see that the right information is being given. So for the sake of moving the debate along, I'd like to go back to the audience, and I'm really keen on talking to you more. So if you've got any questions.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Elsie Sutherland, and I'm here. I'm an ex-social worker, and I've listened all these things that I came to before, every Brexit and whatever, for my age. However, I wanted to know from the council, Ami's gone. Yeah. What support group you have for people when we have stabbing, we have all these incidents and things like that? I know you talked about, but yours are more of a hierarchy structure. Who work with the police as an advisory group, you said? Right. To me now, I feel we need to have people who people can go to. I have lots of people comes to me when they're in tears and things like that. Who do we have as support work, in the borough? A group of people that anything they can be called and train them. They're not counseling, but at the same time, it's someone for giving reassurance, empowering people to ensure that they go on through the right channel. You understand? I think really we need some support in those areas to support the people who has lost their loved ones.
Thanks, Elsie. There are a number of there's a community serious youth violence forum which is made up of statutory services, so YOS, Youth Offending Service. I think members of the gangs team sit on this forum, as well as all the voluntary sector organisations that work around serious youth violence, knife crime, mentoring. So this forum meets, I think, bi-monthly, every 6 weeks, if I'm correct. And they discuss. They've got a directory which sets out what each organisation does. So, it's a fluid document because there's organisations joining this forum all the time. But they provide counselling. That directory will tell whoever had access to it where they could go for counselling for parents and for young people, but also what organisations are working in their area and what they're doing in their area in different parts of the borough. So there are things in place. Also, we've got our Youth Offending Service and our gangs team that do a lot of work with young people and their parents and carers. So I think it's just about making that information available to all so that someone like you are aware of it, but also going onto the council website, having a look at the gangs team, the YOS team, and finding out what they're doing. They are out in the community. They've got community workers, outreach workers that attend the estates, work on the estates, work at events, and try and raise their profile. So they're doing that at the moment. But yeah, I'll feedback that they need greater engagement. Thank you.
I just talk about trust and one-to-one. You understand? People more confident is telling you something really what's happening.
Yeah, as I said, some of these groups do one-to-one, but they also do group work as well. So I'll make a note of that, Elsie. I've got your contact details, so that information can get cascaded to you.
So do we have any other questions before I read one out? Oh, a couple of it back.
Hello everyone, my name is Serge Massamba. I just came to Croydon when I was a teenager. I learned English in Croydon College like in 97, so it's been like a little while. I've been listening to what you said, that was quite very interesting. Actually I'm a support worker, so I've been working with people with dementia, autism, Alzheimer, mental health issues, people who try to kill themselves. And so the reason why I came today is just like I've been working on that project. We just like to reach young people, to communicate between them and to communicate with professionals. That's an app for mobile phone. So instead of having the young people coming to us, we can just put themselves available for them, that they can be any time of the day. And they can just like write down what if they got a problem about like bullying, about homophobia, if they met homophobia, like something like that, hate crimes as well, and they will be like professional, will be able to advise them on that situation. Because I think there's two common points between the people who commit hate crime. They all been in school, so I think school have to be the point when we put access to it. And the second thing is ignorance. So maybe more education for them, showing them that For example, there's some people who still believe that homophobia is like a sickness, so maybe they should be learn about it. Some people think that being a Muslim is being a terrorist. They need to be taught about those things. So that platform they are made is just can resolve and talk to any of the situations, because I think that somebody who just, for example, like that lady who said that she needs to teach people about like being a Muslim, because different type of being a Muslim, things like that. If people got questions, they can go and ask there straight away instead of just going left and right. App which is just available for everyone. Okay, thank you.
My name is Sedley Wilson. I'm the chairman of Croydon People First. Not all people with learning disabilities live at home. But reporting crime to the police, the police probably need a specialist officer for someone to talk to. There's a lot of people with disabilities are really scared of the police. I don't know why, but you probably need a specialised person.
Specialist person rather than the police, yes. I mean, I agree 100% with what Sedley said about a lot of disabled people or people with disabilities are reluctant to converse with the police or with the authorities for whatever reason. Some of it will be to do with the nature of the disability itself. The communication is a problem, it's an issue, it's something that they may find very difficult. But one of the things that struck me when Councillor Ali was talking, and it's related to Sedley's point, is the use of WhatsApp to share information. Well, one of the reasons we do it is because it's easy. You can just click a button and you can share the information. But to ring the police is quite a chore. I wouldn't know the police telephone number in Croydon. If an incident happened in my house, I just don't have it. And I do talk to my staff and say, would you report an incident to the police? And the answer usually is no, because they won't do anything about it because they don't have the resources anymore. And that's not just to be criticising the police because they're not here. I just think it's reality. It's difficult for anybody to report an incident to the police. For a disabled person, it can be even more difficult. I think a specialist person or an identified person who the community have trust in that something will be done would be a huge benefit, particularly in hate crime.
Okay. Could I just add something to that? I also want to add something that just came to me when you were talking, James, is this idea of using either social media or apps to report. I think we all need to, and also disability, I think we all need to understand that for everyone who's currently aged between 30 and under, relationships aren't how they used to be. Everyone's meeting each other on apps, everyone's dating on apps, friends are talking to each other on apps, young people are talking less and less in reality, but on apps and on everywhere, that's where communication is happening. So I totally understand that, it's a top-down kind of thing, rhetoric at the moment. Police are underfunded at the moment, but we do need to look to the future, and I do personally think, and the more and more young people we can get on board on this, especially in these spaces, they will tell you that actually having app-related reporting, and obviously it needs to be sourced and done in a legitimate way where fake reporting cannot happen. But I think I personally think that will be the future.
Okay, and just on that, can I add that
they'll find it safer?
Yeah, they do find it safer, and I think with our hotline that we've had at ARCC reporting hate, it's been really successful because ARCC is somewhere they trust. So maybe that's something that you could pick up and take forward as a trial for what we're doing as copying. So that would be a good thing to do, wouldn't it?
I just wanted to pick up on the point about when a person with a disability reports it via the police, and sometimes they they find it difficult to explain that they feel that they're a victim of a hate incident. Recently, the police, the new BCU, were trained by Stop Hate UK, so all the call handlers have just received training, so hate crime awareness training, so they now know how to ask more probing questions to identify whether a particular crime has a hate element. So I think, hopefully, I have no reports on how it's gone, but just the training that Stop Hate have rolled out in other boroughs, I think it will help in our call handlers actually identifying hate incidences on top of the other criminal activity that goes on. So that's something that's only recently been rolled out.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I want to go back to one of the questions I've got on from somebody we spoke to, and they said basically, this is to anybody on the panel really, it's all very well to talk about popular issues on the ground, but how is the government going to tackle institutional hate crime, such as privileges afforded to certain communities and not others? Anybody fancy giving that go? We're talking about institutional.
So, again, going back to our findings, we see more institutional racism that is taking place, not because it's more taking place, people are actually becoming more courageous to come forward and report it. But if I pick up on what's happening in institutions, what's happening sometimes in workplaces, and specifically in managerial roles where people use and abuse the roles to be able to dictate as well as be able to discriminate their employees, that's something that definitely we see. And the employees sometimes feel that, well, I need to earn a living, I need to pay my bills at the end of the day, and I don't want to lose my job now. And when people call us, they say, I want you to know what's happening, but I don't want to act on it now. I want to wait till I leave the job. Which is a shame, because the individual then suffers in silence and copes with so many things to be able to earn a living. But there's more that needs to be done in terms of institutions, in terms of the diversity of the communities that they have, in terms of policies and how they address issues of discrimination, because obviously if you talk about employment and institutions, this is a civil matter, it does not even go to the police. And then you have the element around politicians, you have the elements around councillors, and I know we've been saying in all parties there's racism, there's anti-Semitism, there's Islamophobia that is taking place, and unfortunately sometimes people use their privileged positions to actually abuse other communities or be really using abusive language to other communities. We've seen that in our reports, we've seen that in other reports. And really, how do you tackle that when someone who is in a privileged position does not get punished for the words they're using or the actions they're doing? And unfortunately, they are not punished, but people are on the street are becoming more emboldened to use the same language that these privileged individuals have used. And how do you stop that cycle? We look out to politicians, right? We look out to the people that we voted. We look out to role models. And if they are the ones that are abusing the roles by using abusive language, what happens to the person on the street who has not maybe engaged with any Muslim member of the community and decides to take a language that is being used by a privileged person in position and abuse Muslim communities or black communities or LGBT communities? What happens then? And who holds them accountable? So if we look at political parties, one of the things that we suggested in our reports is where political parties need to take action towards everyone and not excluding certain individuals, and actually communicate with the communities about what's happening, communicate about the levels of discrimination, racism, abuse that is taking place within their party as well as across their parties, and being transparent on the procedures they're taking. Whether they're expelling members or not expelling members, investigations are taking place on how they're taking place, whether it's the Tory party and the anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia that is there, whether it's the Labour Party and anti-Semitism that is there, whether it's other parties and other things that are taking place, we need to look at this and reflect. And they need to communicate to communities on how this is working. whether we need to call out these individuals when these things happen. I think the role of each and every one of us is as well to call out these things when these happen. It's not because I'm a conservative Tory, I'm not, but I'm saying, if you are a conservative Tory, then because you vote for the Conservatives, then oh my God, I cannot be critical of the Conservative Party if they've said something that is abusive, or equally the Labour Party. I think if we do love our parties and if we do love this country, we need to be critical when we need to, and we need to do that in a very constructive way. So educational, I said it's a civil matter. Institutional, I said it's a civil matter, but nevertheless, I think we need to ensure that when we see it, we speak about it. And sometimes colleagues play a big role. So if you witness a colleague who's being discriminated against, we need to actually report that. On a political party level, again, we need to hold our community leaders accountable, and we need to call them out when they do abuse certain communities. And then on an education level, 1 in 10 cases that we receive take place in schools and universities. And we need to reflect on that as well and see what's happening on an educational level, and how can educational institutions look more onto tackling hate incidents within their institutions. Again, let's not forget that we have multiple identities, and most probably these individuals have been attacked for either their multiple identities or for one of them or for two of them. And how do we address that? And how do we, again, when we're talking about all of these things, look at it as the one hate that we're looking to tackle, and not the individual characteristic hate that we're looking to tackle. So not it's just because it's a Muslim colleague that is being abused, oh, it's not affecting me as an LGBT person, so I shouldn't be bothered, or vice versa. We're all in it together.
I agree with pretty much what you said. I just wanted to look at it as a glass half full rather than half empty approach. I mean, if you look at the police, what it was like in the 70s and 80s, if you recall, Macpherson coined the police at the time that it was institutionally racist, and that was formally declared because a lot of the processes and procedures were very much biased against the ethnic minorities, and it stood out during the investigation. 79 recommendations were made by that inquiry. One of them was to set up IAGs, but then there were many other. And gradually, the organization has gone through a transformation. And if you look at the Met today, it's not perfect. I'm not saying that for a second. But when you compare with what it was like in the 70s and 80s, it is very much a different organization now in terms of its recognition of diversity, in terms of recognizing and challenging racism. A lot of the police officers at the time who were openly racist, many of them are gone. It's history, you know, and in fact you've now got a female commissioner of police for the first time in Cressida Dick, you know, which is a diversity, which is a gender diversity that you've now got. But still, there's work to do, and I think that also, if you look across government departments and other organizations, many organizations are spending a lot of money into diversity training and bringing in consultants. I've got a friend of mine who has said to me that she's been extremely busy this last couple of years in teaching inclusivity to employers and to take away this unconscious bias that we all have, unconscious racism that we all have inside of us, the way we behave, and you know, and how to address it, how to recognize it, and how to diminish it. So there is work happening, and of course, you know, when there's no magic bullet solution to it, but when you compare, you know, 10 years back or 20 years back, and then you look at where we are, despite the fact that, you know, there has been a lot of improvements, but then when you get a leader like a Johnson or a Trump or a Farage who makes the kinds of incendiary comments that they do, sometimes it feels like you've taken 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because that's the effect that they have. You know, they reverse a lot of the good work that is being done, and then you've got to redress that again, and you've got to work to repairing the damage that these people are doing, you know, and unfortunately it does feel like that. But I think looking at it as glass full, generally the trend is towards improving and addressing the issues of bigotry and hatred that we've been talking about. But and of course organizations like the ones that are represented here and forums like this are part of that process of helping us moving forward. And I think, to be honest, we are moving forward. It may not often feel like it, but we are generally moving forward.
Any more questions? Thanks for that, Shaquille. Any more questions? Right.
Hi, thank you. My name's Rosa, and I live in Upper Norwood. I'm currently visiting a relative in hospital every day at the moment, and what I've noticed is many of the staff there. I'm not going to name the ward and everything, but I'm just going to say that I've noticed that many of the staff who are Afro-Caribbean and West Indian origin, whether they're from abroad or here, are suffering comments from patients about things like, why do you come here? Why are you here? Patients actually saying this to nursing staff, to healthcare assistants, and this needs to be tackled. It's a culture, it's the seeds of racism that are being sown. Whether this is, increased due to the referendum over Brexit, I'm talking anecdotally here, but what I'm seeing, I think, is a reflection of what's going on broadly, particularly maybe in Croydon. And I think that there needs to be work done by the unions, by the Health Trust, Croydon Clinical Commissioning Group, whoever's responsible for staff's working conditions in Croydon UCH. And don't get me wrong, I've also seen, Indigenous English people treat staff with the utmost respect and care and gratification. I've seen that, but what I'm also seeing is comments that are inappropriate, that are racist, and that my mother, who is Asian, is witnessing this. And how does that make a vulnerable patient from a BAME background feel? It makes me feel very upset as a relative witnessing this, that this is going on openly and nothing is being done, nothing is challenging it. So I'd like to see some form of work done to actually protect staff within CUH, because they may not feel they're able to come forward because it's their working environment, it's their job, it's something they may feel they just have to put up with. I think it's wrong and it needs to be addressed.
So that really was the last comment we have time for, and I hope that this is productive discussion. Just some closing thoughts. So what I've picked up, first of all, thank you to the panelists. I really appreciate your input, and I think we've had some really interesting discussions and thoughts come out for taking this work forward. What we're hearing today really is that there needs to be more done around victim support, and that I think is reinforced by what this gentleman has just experienced as well. And there needs a programme of raising awareness and education generally. There needs to be support around third-party reporting and bystander reporting. There needs to be work done with communities and the authorities, so it's a two-way process, and something needs to be done about online communication and the effectiveness of that in a world where technology is playing such an important role. So my closing thoughts really are that the important thing really about community cohesion and the work that we do is about changing the narrative of the other. It's about talking about the commonalities as opposed to the differences. It's about understanding victimization doesn't matter what you have been victim of. It's that feeling of victimization and that feeling of being violated. That support needs to be given to communities, and also the ignorance and the lack of education that institutions have about particular communities needs to be, the education has to come from bottom up, not top down. So that's my closing thoughts for today, and I want to thank you all for all your time, and we will continue to have these communications and these events, and I hope you'll join us for the next one. Thank you.